Good evening, everybody. Good evening, sir. My name is Eliza Miano, and I am the leader of Group 4. I will be discussing about Republic Act 9155. So, Republic Act 9155 is an act instituting a framework of governance for basic education, establishing authority and accountability, renaming the Department of Education, Culture, and Sports as the Department of Education, and for other purposes. Section 1, we have here the short title. So, this act shall be known as Governance of Basic Education Act of 2001. So, when we say RA 9155, it means that it is Governance of Basic Education Act of 2001. Section 2 is we have here Declaration of Policy. It is the policy of the state to the first is to protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality basic education. It has a vision to make such education accessible to all. So when we say all, it means that it is compulsory education in the elementary level, followed by providing all Filipino children education in the high school level, a free education for everybody. So in this way, everybody, regardless of your status in life, regardless of your age, everybody has a complete right to education. Alternative learning system for out-of-school youth and adult learners. So the state not only gives its focus to younger learners, but also it offers a alternative learning system, also known as ALS. And the focus of out-of-school youth and adult learners, the focus of their education, they should be taught the knowledge, skills, and values that they need to be a productive and good citizen of the land. The school, so we all know that school will always be related to education. So in this act, school is known as the heart of the formal education system. It is where the children learn, and schools shall have a single aim, and that aim is to provide the best possible basic education for all learners. Again, when we say all learners, regardless of their age, their status in life, as long as they wanted to learn, we call them as learners. The governance. Governance, where the policy and principle for the governance of basic education shall be translated into programs, projects, and services developed, adopted, and offered to fit local needs. So we have here the governance, the national level, regions, divisions, schools, and learning center. The state shall encourage local initiatives for improving the quality of basic education. So when we say local initiatives, it is not just the Department of Education whom should promote education, but also there should be a collaboration between the parents, the Department of Education, the faculty, I mean the teachers, and the school officials when it comes to promoting education. So again, the state shall ensure that the values, needs, and aspirations of a school community are reflected in the program of education for the children, out of school youth, and adult learners. Section 3, we have here purposes and objectives of the act. So why? So this Republic Act, so these are the purposes and objectives of this Republic Act. So the first one is to provide the framework for the governance of basic education. So the framework that will be created through this Republic Act that will serve as the standard or the guide. So again, to provide the framework for the governance of basic education, which shall set the general directions for educational policies and standards and establish authority, accountability, and responsibility for achieving higher learning outcomes. Of course, there should be a framework. There should be a skeleton of what the Department of Education should do or what are their plans. So again, through this Republic Act, there will be a framework, and through that framework, that will serve as a guide for the Department of Education if what would be the plan that they needed to execute. Um, to define, we have here national level, regions, divisions, schools, learning center, to define the roles and responsibilities of and provide resources to the field offices which shall implement educational programs, projects, and services in communities they serve. So, of course, it is very important that each of them dapat meron talagang role so that they would know if what are the tasks that are specifically designed for them. At the same time, hindi sila mag-aagawan ng mga gawain, hindi sila magsasapawan kung ano ba dapat yung mga kailangan gawin kasi nga may specific na task bawat department. So again, to define roles, and also they will provide or resources will be provided. Second is, one of the purpose and objectives of this Republic Act is to make schools and learning centers the most important vehicle for the teaching and learning of national values and for developing in the Filipino learners' love of country and pride in its rich heritage. So, of course, the school, diba, dapat yung paaralan talaga ay hindi lang maging paraan para matuto sila ng mga academic matters, but also for them to learn national values such as pagiging magalang, pagmamahal ng sariling bansa, and also to know their customs and traditions as Filipinos. Next is to ensure that schools and learning centers receive the kind of focused attention they deserve and that educational programs, projects, and services take into account the interest of all members of the community. So again, kailangan yung atensyon na karapat-dapat para sa educational program ay maibigay para kung ano man yung pangangailangan ng mga learners ay maibigay din. Next is to enable the schools and learning centers to reflect the values of the community by allowing teachers, learning facilitators, and other staff to have the flexibility to serve the needs of all learners. So learner-based, basically, it's a learner-based, and whatever the learners need, it must be given to them. That's why we, syempre, as school personnel or staff that is working related to the field of education, we should also be flexible kasi magkakaiba ang mga learners na ating na encounter. So hindi porket nag-work or gumana yung ating strategy sa ating mga learners few years ago, it means na gagana rin yun sa mga learners natin in the future. So again, nagbabago. So meron tayong progress, no, pagdating sa ating learners and also to our strategies as teachers. Next is to encourage local initiatives for the improvement of schools and learning centers and to provide the means by which these improvements may be achieved and sustained. So dapat merong local initiatives. Again, these initiatives must be a collaboration of LGU, the parents, of course, and teachers, and also the shareholders. So again, kailangan may participation lahat, may collaboration para ma-reach natin yung goal natin, which is to provide quality education for everybody. To establish schools and learning centers as facilities where school children are able to learn a range of core competencies prescribed for elementary and high school education programs, or where the out-of-school youth and adult learners are provided alternative learning programs and receive accreditation for at least the equivalent of high school education. So as we establish schools and learning centers, dapat makater niya lahat. Again, hindi lang yung mga school children, kundi pati yung mga out-of-school youth and syempre learners that that have special needs. And whatever the rules the school is implementing, wag nating kalimutan na nasa batas pa rin to give everyone a chance or let's give everybody an access to education regardless of their age, status in life, hindi dahilan ng pagkakaiba ng kanilang status sa buhay at kanilang edad para i-deprive natin sa kanila yung education. And wag kalimutan again na nasa batas as we are discussing about RA 9155 and out of school youth and students of ALS, they play a vital role in the quality of education system as well. So section 4, for section 4, we have here definition of terms. So for purposes of this act, the terms or phrases used shall mean or be understood as follows. So alternative learning system, when we say alternative learning system and we are talking about RA 9155, it means that it is a parallel learning system to provide a viable alternative to the existing formal education instruction. It encompasses both the non-formal and informal sources of knowledge and skills. So again, alternative learning system. So basically, the reason why the learners are here, it's because they cannot access the formal education system. So next is we have basic education. So basic education, if you're referring to this RA 9155, it is the education intended to meet basic learning needs which lays the foundation on which subsequent learning can be based. It encompasses early childhood, elementary, and high school education, as well as alternative learning system for out-of-school youth and adult learners, and includes education for those with special needs. So basic education covers everybody. Next is cluster of schools. When we say cluster of schools, it is a group of schools that are geographically contiguous and brought together to improve the learning outcomes. So if you are living in a small area, having a cluster of schools, it is very beneficial because you could help one another. Formal education. So when we say formal education, this is the systematic and deliberate process of hierarchically structured and sequential learning corresponding to the general concept of elementary and secondary level of schooling. So again, formal education. So you're in school and you have undergone the process of being grade 1 pupil up to the secondary level of schooling. Next is we have informal education. So when we say informal education, this is a lifelong process of learning by which every person acquires and accumulates knowledge, skills, attitudes, and insights from daily experiences at home, at work, at play, and from life itself. So, even if they are not in the formal schooling, they could still learn something at home, as they play and also as they work, especially for our working students and from the life itself. So again, it is a lifelong process of learning. That is informal education. Integrated schools. So integrated schools, it is a school that offers a complete basic education in one school site and has unified instructional programs. So majority ng mga schools ay integrated schools and they only have here one school head. Learner. So when we say learner, again, regardless of the age, so when we say learner, it is any individual seeking basic literacy skills and functional life skills or support services for the improvement of the quality of his or her life. So it doesn't matter whether we are referring to adult learners or adult individual or let's say teenagers. We can still call them as learners as long as they seek for new knowledge and skills. Learning center. So when we say learning center, this is a venue for face-to-face learning activities and other learning opportunities for community development and improvement of the people's quality of life. So it could be, again, it is a physical space, so it could just be a certain place where learning takes place. So we call that as learning center. Learning facilitator. So learning facilitator, of course, this plays a very important role in the education because when we say learning facilitator based from RA 9155, it is the key learning support person who is responsible for supervising, facilitating the learning process and activities of the learner. So we can call ourselves as learning facilitator. Non-formal education. So when we say non-formal education, so is any organized systematic educational activity carried outside the framework of the formal system to provide selected types of learning to a segment of the population. So non-formal education is again an educational setup or a setup wherein the learners learn, but it is outside the framework of the formal system. Quality education. So when we say quality education, it is the appropriateness, relevance, and excellence of the education given to meet the needs and aspirations of an individual and society. So keywords are appropriateness, relevance, and excellence. So the education must have those three before we can call it quality education. School, of course. School is very important. So when we say school, based from RA 9155, it's an educational institution. It could be a private and public undertaking educational operation with a specific age group of pupils or students pursuing defined studies at defined levels, receiving instruction from teachers, usually located in a building or a group of buildings in a particular physical or cyber site. So this could be, an institution that has different department for each grade level, such as elementary, high school, and then now that we have senior high school. School head. So what is a school head? Based from RA 9155, school head, it is the person responsible for the administrative and instructional supervision of the school or cluster of schools. So it is very obvious that the school head is the one who's leading a certain school. Chapter 1, Governance of Basic Education. So under Section 5, we have here principles of shared governance. So when we say shared governance, it is a principle that recognizes that every unit in the education bureaucracy has a particular role, task, and responsibility inherent in the office and for which it is principally accountable for outcomes. So again, every unit has a role, a particular role. Kaya nga, as mentioned earlier, di ba, meron tayong definition of roles and they are the one who provide resources to the schools na kanilang nasasakupan. So we have here Section 5, Principles of Shared Governance. The first principle is shared governance is a principle which recognizes that just like what I had mentioned earlier. Second is in the decision-making process at appropriate levels, they give feedback. So feedback mechanism shall be established to ensure coordination and open communication of the central office with the regional, division, and school level. So there should be a communication between the different levels. Next is accountability and transparency shall be operationalized in the performance of functions and responsibilities at all levels. And communication channels of field offices shall be strengthened to facilitate the flow of information. Section 6, we have governance. So when we say governance, the Department of Education, Culture, and Sports shall henceforth be called the Department of Education, and it shall be vested with authority, accountability, and responsibility for ensuring access to promoting equity in and improving the quality of basic education. Arts, culture, and sports shall be as provided for in sections 8 and 9 hereof. Because, again, this is the part wherein it was really stated that since it was called Department of Education, Culture, and Sports before, under Section 6, it was officially called as Department of Education. And the arts and culture and sports has a separate sections, and that would be sections 8 and 9. Section 7, powers, duties, and functions. So here, the Secretary of the Department of Education shall exercise overall authority and supervision over the operations of the department. So this is the task, or this is the power of the Secretary of the Department of Education. So we have here, of course, she or he has the overall authority and supervision. So this is the sequence. So we have here the Secretary of Education. So under the Secretary of Education, she or he will have not more than 4 undersecretaries and not more than 4 assistant secretaries. So the Secretary of Education shall be assisted by the undersecretaries and assistant secretaries that I have mentioned. There should be, again, at least one undersecretary and one assistant secretary who shall be career executive service officers chosen from among the staff of the department. Secretary of Education, national level. So these are his or her task. So first is formulate national educational policies, formulate a national basic education plan, promulgating national educational standards, monitoring and assessing national learning outcomes, undertaking national educational research and studies, enhancing the employment status, professional competence, welfare, and working conditions of all personnel of the department, and enhancing the total development of learners through local and national programs and or projects. So all of this is formulated to promote a systematic way of involving different units to organize education. Regional level. So we have here defining a regional educational policy framework which reflects the needs and expectations of the communities they serve. Developing a regional basic education plan, developing regional educational standards with a view towards benchmarking for international competitiveness, monitoring, evaluating, and assessing regional learning outcomes, undertaking research projects, and developing and managing region-wide projects which may be funded through official development assistance and or other funding agencies. So, consistent with the national educational policies, plans, and standards, the regional director, you should always remember that the regional director shall have authority, accountability, and responsibility for the following that I have mentioned. Next is we have division level. So under division level, these are the power and functions. So first is developing, implementing division education development plans, planning and managing effective and efficient use of all personal, physical, and fiscal resources of the division, including professional staff development. Hiring, placing, and evaluating all division supervisors and schools district supervisors as well as all employees in the division, both teaching and non-teaching personnel, including school heads, except for the assistant division superintendent. Monitoring the utilization of funds provided by the national government and the local government units to the schools and learning centers. Again, a division shall consist of a province or a city which shall have a schools division superintendent, at least one assistant schools division superintendent, and an office staff for programs, promotion, planning, administrative, fiscal, legal, and other support services. So basically, of course, they just cover the division level, but still following what was being given by the Secretary of Education. Same goes with, so this is the continuation, ensuring compliance of quality standards for basic education programs. And for this purpose, strengthening the role of division supervisors as a subject area specialist, promoting awareness of and adherence by all schools and learning centers to accreditation standards prescribed by the Secretary of Education, supervising the operations of all public and private elementary, secondary, and integrated schools and learning centers, and performing such other functions as may be assigned by proper authorities. So again, just like what we have discussed from the previous classes, diba? So as much as possible, if your school had encountered a certain problem, they try to address it or they try to solve it without let's say, nang hindi na pinapaakyat pa. Yan. Kung kaya namang resolbahin, then resolbahin na. Kasi naman, paakyatin agad nang hindi man lang tinry or sinubukan na isolve. Ayan. Schools district level, so we have here providing professional and instructional advice and support to the school heads and teachers, facilitators of schools and learning centers in the district or cluster thereof, curricula supervision, and performing such other functions as may be assigned by proper authorities. Upon the recommendation of the school's division superintendents, the regional director may establish additional schools district within schools division. Now, schools districts already existing at the time of the passage of this law shall be maintained. So, iwan sila. A schools district shall have a schools district supervisor and an office staff for program and promotion. Again, no matter which level, they still apply the main goal of the DepEd secretary. So, ano pa rin yung pinlano niya from the start, ganun dapat din yung ine-execute ng mga mas mababang level. Kailangan sundin pa rin yung guidelines na kanyang ibinigay. Next is schools district level. So we have here setting the mission, vision, goals, and objectives of the school, creating an environment within the school that is conducive to learning and teaching, implementing the school curriculum and being accountable for higher learning outcomes, developing the school education program and school improvement plan, offering educational programs, projects, and services which provide equitable opportunities for all learners in the community, introducing new and innovative modes of instruction to achieve higher learning outcomes. So again, there shall be a school head for all public elementary schools and public high schools or a cluster thereof. Now, the establishment of integrated schools from existing public elementary and public high schools shall be encouraged. The school head, who may be assisted by an assistant school head or assistant principal, shall be both an instructional leader and administrative manager. Siyempre naman, para kapag wala yung isa, diba, may isa pang sasalo. So, the school head shall form a team with the school teachers, learning facilitators for delivery of quality educational programs, project, and services. So, as mentioned, ideally, dapat maganda ang relationship ng school head sa kanyang team members such as school teachers or learning facilitators para mas ma-execute ng maganda yung mga plans sa school, 'di ba? At least mas ma-encourage yung mga teachers na gawin yung certain task na binigay sa kanila ng school head kasi maganda nga yung relationship na meron sila. Next is we have administering and managing all personal, physical, and fiscal resources of the school. It is recommending the staffing complement of the school based on its needs, encouraging staff development, establishing school and community networks, and encouraging the active participation of teachers' organizations, non-academic personnel of public schools, and parent-teachers community associations. So, again, as much as possible, napakalaking bagay talaga ng may magandang relationship ang teachers at saka ang school heads. At the same time, diba, kailangan din i-promote ang staff development and also kailangan i-involve yung mga magulang. Katulad nga yung nabanggit kanina sa isang section na it should be a collaboration between the LGU, the parents, teachers, and also the school personnel. Accepting donations, gifts, bequests, and grants for the purpose of upgrading teachers, learning facilitators' competencies, improving and expanding school facilities, and providing instructional materials and equipment. Such donations or grants must be reported to the appropriate district supervisors and division superintendents. And lastly, performing such other functions as may be assigned by proper authorities. So, kung sakali man na merong may magbibigay ng mga regalo o kaya naman merong, for example, donations and such, kailangan siyang i-report or kailangan siyang mai-record muna. Ayan. At ibigay sa mga district supervisors and division superintendents. Siyempre naman, para walang maging problema or walang maging issue at all. The Secretary of Education shall create a promotions board at the appropriate levels which shall formulate and implement a system of promotion for schools, division supervisors, schools district supervisors, and school heads. So now, the promotion of school heads, hindi lang yun hindi yun parang hinuhula-hulahan. So promotion of school heads shall be based on, of course, educational qualification, the merit and performance rather than on the number of teachers, learning facilitators, and learners in the school. Next is the qualifications, salary guide, status of employment and welfare and benefits of school heads shall be the same for public, elementary, secondary, and integrated schools. So, napakalinaw naman nun, no? Qualifications, salary grade, status of employment and welfare and benefits of school heads shall be the same for public, elementary, secondary, and integrated schools. So, next is no appointment to the positions of regional directors, assistant regional directors, schools division superintendents, and assistant schools division superintendents shall be made unless the appointee is a career executive service officer who preferably shall have risen from the ranks. Napakalinaw. Basta, ang main point doon is kapag hindi ka qualify, dapat hindi ka mapopromote. O kaya naman dapat naabot mo yung mga certain standards yan, na kanilang binigay para ikaw ay ma-promote. Chapter 2, Transfer of Cultural Agencies. So we have here Section 8, Cultural Agencies. So the Komisyon ng Wikang Pilipino, National Historical Institute, Record Management and Archives Office, and the National Library shall now be administratively attached to the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, NCCA, and no longer with the Department of Education. So as you have remembered from the previous section, diba, it is a certain section wherein it was declared that it will be solely called as Department of Education, and the art and the culture and also the arts will be put in a separate place or separate sections. So again, it was mentioned here that Department of Education and the arts and culture will be separated from one another. So it will become part of the National Commission for Cultural and the Arts, so NCCA. Next is we have Chapter 3, the abolition of the Bureau of Physical Education and School Sports. The abolition of BPESS. So that is Bureau of Physical Education and School Sports. So all functions, programs, and activities of the Department of Education related to sports competition shall be transferred to the Philippine Sports Commission. So dati kasi magkakasama sila. Ngayon, according to Section 9, lahat ng mga programs na related sa sports ay nasa kamay na ng Philippine Sports Commission yung pag-handle nitong mga sumusunod. Ano ba yung mga sports before? Mga, ba yung parang may mga competition sa school, ganyan, sa districts and such. Yan. So, under na yun ng Philippine Sports Commission. Chapter 4, Support and Assistance of Other Government Agencies. So, dito sabi, under Section 10, the Secretary of Education and the Secretary of Budget and Management shall, within 90 days from the approval of this act, jointly promulgate the guidelines on the allocation, distribution, and utilization of resources provided by the national government for the field offices, taking into consideration the uniqueness of the working conditions of the teaching service. So again, the Secretary of Department of Education shall ensure that resources appropriated for the field offices are adequate, sapat, and that resources for school personnel, yan, yung mga para sa mga school personnel, school desk, textbooks, and other instructional materials intended are allocated directly and released immediately by Department of Budget and Management to said offices. So, may budget naman pala kasi talaga. Okay, next. Section 11. So, the Secretary of the Department of Education subject to civil service laws and regulations shall issue appropriate personnel policy rules and regulations that will best meet the requirements of the teaching profession, taking into consideration the uniqueness of the working conditions of the teaching service. So again, as what was written here in section number 11, So, civil service laws and regulations shall issue appropriate personnel policy rules and regulations that will best meet the requirements of teaching profession. Okay. Next is we have Section 12, the Commission on Audit, and the issuance of audit rules and regulations that will govern the utilization of all resources as well as the liquidation, recording, and reporting thereof shall take into account the different characteristics and distinct features of the department's field offices, its organizational setup, as well as the nature of the operation of schools and learning centers. So, since magkakaiba ng sitwasyon, bawat department, field offices, so dapat daw i-take consideration naman daw ng Commission on Audit. So, kumbaga, kung yung ganitong department ay ganito yung ginastos or nagamit, dapat lang, dapat mag-provide lang naman ng mga evidences na ganito napunta yung fund and such. And that's it. So, thank you so much. That's the end of RA 9155.